This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Grace Shin. Tonight's top stories. China's economic growth grew at its weakest pace in more than 3 years, raising questions over whether Beijing can meet its annual target. And Tehran threatens to cut off more vital seaways beyond Hormuz as Washington renews its naval blockade of Iranian ports. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi takes on opposition leaders in a debate to resolve a legislative gridlock in the Diet. Cambodian leader Hun Manet in China to deepen economic ties, looking to turn close political relations into broader gains. Also tonight, for years, China's presence in South Africa was defined by railways, roads, and mega infrastructure projects. But a quieter transformation is now underway. Thanks for joining us on East Asia Tonight. We'll begin today with the latest economic numbers fresh out of China with Roland. Roland, China's economy unexpectedly slowed for the second quarter. Can you tell us the details?
Yes, Grace. The exports held up, but property, household spending still under pressure. Market watchers say data is pointing to an increasingly uneven economy. China's GDP growth cooled to 4.3% in the second quarter, missing its full-year target and marking its slowest expansion since 2022. Officials say the economy remains stable despite mounting pressures. But amid this slowdown, how much longer can export-led growth shoulder the weight? And when will policymakers be forced to trigger major stimulus? Well, Deborah Wong reports.
5 months into the Iran conflict, China is feeling the squeeze of a global economic slowdown and a persistent property slump. While quarterly growth has hit a 3.5-year low, first-half GDP figures still scraped by at 4.7%, keeping Beijing's 2026 growth targets within reach.
上半年经济顶住压力运行在合理区间，生产供给较快增长，就业形势总体稳定，物价温和上涨，对外贸易增势良好。
China's exports once again did the heavy lifting, with global AI spending and shifts to clean energy fueling demand for Chinese chips and electric vehicles. But analysts warn this cannot carry the entire economy.
When we look at the June data, China's export was 20-something up compared with last year, but China's import was 30-something up compared with last year. It's actually telling us that China's net export could be smaller than the first quarter. So what China needs to do in the second half of the year is to boost both consumption and investment to mitigate any downside impact of net export, not just the export.
Yet domestic consumption remains weak. June retail sales inched up 1%, following declines in the previous month. Experts point to the need for structural reform.
A more sustainable way to support China's consumption is to create more jobs in the service sector, and that will take quite a long time to adjust. For China to deliver its consumption in a more sustainable way, it has to be broader based and reform instead of any short-term coupons.
Fixed asset investment, which typically includes infrastructure and manufacturing spending, plunged 5.7% in the first half of the year. Government crackdowns on price wars could weigh on investment growth in the near term, but economists believe it will restore long-term profits. They expect the outlook to remain negative for the rest of 2026 as local governments prioritize debt management. However, it could offer a window for reform.
This year is actually a gap for policy to actually deliver strong investment. We're talking about the US-China stabilization. After May, there was a term called strategic stability, that the two sides are not adding tariff to each other. And there are 3 more meetings coming between the two leaders in the second half of the year. However, who knows what's the next year, and especially in 2028, that's when the US transition is going to happen. So this is actually a rare window for China to deliver reform. So any reallocation of the money is likely to be more missed.
Premier Li Qiang hinted at expansionary policies earlier this week, but the real test comes at the end of the month. Now that's when China's Politburo, the country's top decision-making body, will reveal first-half data and plot next steps. Until then, the markets are left waiting. Deborah Wong, CNA, Shenzhen.
And let's check in on how the Greater China markets fared. Both the Shenzhen and Shanghai Composite ending lower as investors digest the economic data and look for clues on Beijing's next steps. A sell-off in semiconductor shares also denting sentiment there, but Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index bucking the trend thanks to tech shares up 1.4%. Now, for a deeper dive into the Chinese economy and its data just out, we're joined by Gary Ng, senior economist at Natixis, speaking to us live from Hong Kong. Gary, good to have you on the show as always. Now, China's economy grew 4.3% last quarter, slowest pace, 3 years, missing Beijing's own target. Is this a soft patch or is this structural in nature?
Well, I would say the Chinese economy is structurally growing slower, and especially if you look at how the government responds and the target, even if everything stay the same, China's economy grew 4.3% in the second half of the year, it is still meeting the lower bound of the annual growth target of 4.5%. So therefore, we do see that there's stronger headwinds from consumption, from investment. The only thing that is doing better will be industrial production because export continue to do quite well. However, whether there will be very, very strong stimulus coming in order to support growth, I don't really think so, because the priority right now is really on innovation, security, and the competition with the US. So even if there is any cyclical support, it's only for the purpose of keeping growth within the range of the target.
So you have said this before, that this slowdown is likely to produce policy fine-tuning rather than a major change in Beijing's strategy. So what should investors look out for at the Politburo meeting later this month that would signal, say, a meaningful shift from supporting production to, say, supporting household demand?
Well, indeed, it is very important for China at this stage to pay maybe a bit less attention to the production factors and lean a bit more shift towards the other side of the economy, like consumption and services. So I do expect that if there are certain change in wordings with real actions in short-term subsidies and also more government bond issuance, especially supporting the digital infrastructure side, and maybe also some targeted reduction in interest rate for certain sectors, I do think those are the major signals that there could be a stronger support from the government, at least from the cyclical perspective. But again, I don't think the size will be massive compared to what we see in the past. This is really for stabilizing the economy.
Gary, why do you think the government fiscal support thus far is not translating into stronger investment on the ground?
Well, if you look at what happened in the investment sector, definitely property is not doing that well. So developers are still undergoing the cycle of adjustment. And what is very different this year is also we see the reduction of manufacturing investment as well, because manufacturers are coping with the overcapacity, they're adjusting to the price war, so therefore they are cutting back the future commitment. I do see this as a healthy development if we think of it from a medium-term perspective, but in the short run, the only sector that is really growing quicker is anything related to technology, electric vehicles, robotics, and also shipbuildings and railway. So those are the sectors that Chinese firms sees growth. So from the government perspective, well, things may be getting worse, but it's also not at any moment of the blink of collapse. So they will simply just try to stabilize the situation with minimum costs.
And given this two-speed economy that Beijing has to manage, how should investors position themselves ahead of that Politburo meeting?
Well, I would say that it will be a very, very targeted type of stimulus if there is any coming. So any change in the stimulus target or direction will be the market mover for the equities or be it the bond market and etc. So if we look at the economic situation right now, I do expect there will be more support coming for consumption, which is at quite a low base at this point, and market pretty much expect that things are not doing that well. So if there is any positive catalyst, then it can help definitely improving the sentiment in the sector. And beyond that, if there is much stronger commitment on, for example, some of this massive grand data center plan or related to AI subsidies, I guess tech can be an other underrated story compared to what we see around the world, like in the US and Korea right now.
Gary, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for your insights. That was Gary Ng, senior economist at Natixis in Hong Kong. Asian markets rebounding as weaker than expected U.S. inflation data ease rate hike fears, with South Korean equities leading the pack. Now, the Kospi closing the day up more than 6%, buoyed by chip heavyweights Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. The country's equity market has skyrocketed over the past 1 year on the back of global AI boom, but has given up its gains in recent months. Trading volatility has also been spiking, triggering the exchange's circuit breaker 7 times this year, and that's out of 13 in the exchange's history. The blame is mostly due to the rise of single-stock leveraged ETFs linked to the 2 chip heavyweights. The instruments that amplify gains and losses were allowed to trade on the Korea exchange late May. Now, President Lee Jae-myung's administration has come under fire for allowing the financial instruments to trade. Mr. Lee told officials today that the market would need time to stabilize and called on regulators to prepare measures to address leveraged ETFs.
All right, as we just heard, SK Hynix's gains follow a powerful rally in its US-listed ADRs. And the ADRs are trading at nearly a 40% premium to the equivalent shares in Seoul. And to help us find out why investors are willing to pay so much more for exactly the same company, Roland Lim is sitting right next to me with the details. So, Roland, before we begin, why don't you explain to us what exactly an ADR is?
Yes, American Depository Receipts. That's simply another way of owning SK Hynix shares. The ADR represents one ordinary share, well, 10 ADRs, I say, represents one ordinary share of SK Hynix in Seoul. So, in theory, after accounting for exchange differences, both these securities should actually be the same because they are actually, valuing the same underlying business. So that's what an ADR is in the simplest terms.
Okay, we get that. But why is the US-listed version so much more expensive?
Well, because this is not about valuation, but more about market structure. I mean, many global investors, especially US funds, prefer to actually buy US securities or are limited to US listed securities. So the ADR gives them an opportunity to buy a US denominated instrument and be able to trade during US time.
Wouldn't arbitrage trade normally eliminate any premium behind that, though?
Yeah, normally it does. Yes. So say, for example, if the stocks in Seoul is cheaper, then the trader will take that stock and convert it into an ADR. This happens by placing those shares with a custodian, and then the US depository bank will then issue those ADRs, and it gets traded on the NASDAQ. And this usually takes a couple of days normally for an ordinary ADR. But in the case of SK Hynix's ADR, there is an additional layer of regulatory reporting requirements and administrative requirements that's actually making the conversion a little bit longer. I'm not exactly clear how long it's been taking, but it's created what traders are calling a conversion bottleneck as such. So as long as there is strong demand for ADRs, but there's limited supply of ADRs, that premium is still set to stay.
A bottleneck is there, and that premium still stayed there. But some people are calling this evidence that the Korean discount that the Lee Jae-myung administration has been propelling may be disappearing. Do you think that's happening?
Well, not necessarily. The two are not the same thing, but they do affect each other. The Korean discount that you're talking about has to do with Korean shares listed on the Kospi index that are actually trading below the valuation of their global peers. And this is usually a legacy story, the fact that there is corporate governance concerns, there is a labyrinthine shareholding structure, or the fact that there is lower foreign institutional participation. The ADR premium, well, that has to do with the scarcity premium. as I've said, the fact that there is high demand for SK Hynix ADRs, but at the same time, there's limited supply of those ADRs at this point in time.
And last question for you before we go. What's the risk for investors buying the ADR today?
Well, they need to know that they're not actually paying for the valuation of an AI chip story boom. They are also paying for the convenience of actually holding US-listed share or security. So if that AI optimism continues, expect that premium to stay in place. But if, for example, that conversion bottleneck eases, or the fact that less people want SK Hynix shares, well, then that premium is also likely to go the other way.
Thank you so much for explaining to us all the details behind this ADR and what we should be looking out for, and also the business news today. Now, we'll head out for a very short break, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, Iran threatens to choke off all Middle East energy exports in response to the U.S. resuming its naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Plus, the Japanese Prime Minister debates opposition leaders amid a legislative gridlock in the diet. Iran is threatening to halt all energy exports from the Middle East following Washington's reimposed naval blockade on Iranian ports. The warning came as U.S. and Iranian forces trade fresh attacks across the region. Local media, citing Iran's Parliamentary Revolutionary Guard Corps, said it could close all other export corridors that benefit the U.S. and its allies, adding that regional exports are either shared or denied by all. A senior Houthi official separately warned the group could close the Bab el-Mandeb gateway to the Red Sea. Now, that's where Saudi oil exports and a substantial share of global shipping pass. Analysts say Iran has been signaling it could use its allies in Yemen to threaten the shipping route, putting at risk two of the world's most vital energy arteries. Asia is heavily reliant on Middle Eastern oil, with most having to be shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. Top buyers of crude include China, India, and Japan. And for more on this story, we have Blake Sifton for CNA joining us live from Tel Aviv. Blake, what do these latest Iranian warnings mean for the rest of the world?
Good evening, Grace. These threats by Iran to restrict all energy outflow from the Middle East will certainly be setting off alarms around the world. In addition to restricting shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has in the past demonstrated an ability to restrict energy flows elsewhere. They have, for example, attacked the UAE Emirate of Fujairah. That is at the end of an oil pipeline that crosses the UAE and bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. In the past, Iran has attacked those facilities, and of course, they easily could once again using drones and various kinds of missiles. Now, similarly, Saudi Arabia has diverted huge amounts of oil away from the Strait of Hormuz to their east-west pipeline that crosses Saudi Arabia and ends at the Red Sea. So in theory, infrastructure like that could also be vulnerable to Iranian attack. And when it comes to the Red Sea, Yemen's Houthi movement really are the ace up Iran's sleeve. During the war in Gaza, in solidarity, they said, with the people of Gaza, the Houthis attacked multiple ships trying to cross the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, that's off the coast of Yemen, on the way to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. That caused shipping companies to divert ships all the way around Africa, which of course takes much longer and is much more expensive. Now, when the war with Iran began in February, most observers expected the Houthis to join in on behalf of Iran, similarly to Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies. But to the shock of many, they did not join in any kind of meaningful way. But they do still maintain the ability to target ships off the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And if they are activated by Iran and restrict shipping through the Red Sea, in addition to the Strait of Hormuz, we could, of course, see a major impact to global energy supplies and prices.
Right, just as we've seen from February when the war broke out, the Strait of Hormuz has presented itself and has been such a critical pathway. Now, what's the situation on the ground from these latest exchanges of strikes between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, this latest exchange of fire between Iran and the United States over the last 5 days or so really is a very serious escalation. We've heard from U.S. Central Command. They said that in their most recent bombing campaign overnight, they struck dozens of Iranian targets in a wave of bombing that lasted for 7 hours. Now, the duration of that campaign is being seen as perhaps an indication that we are returning to the kinds of heavy and sustained bombing that typified U.S. military actions in the beginning of this war. Now, we also need to pay attention to the casualties being caused by these U.S. military attacks. The Iranian military says that in an attack on a base in the city of Bampour, that 7 Iranian soldiers were killed and dozens more injured. And they accused the United States of trying to maximize casualties because they said they struck a barracks, a guest house, as well as guard towers. And in previous airstrikes, it's been understood that the United States, as well as Iran, were working to try to minimize casualties. Now, the Iranian military has promised a decisive response to that attack. Now, for their part, of course, Iran is continuing their attacks against U.S. military assets in Gulf countries like Bahrain, Kuwait, in recent days, Qatar, as well as in Jordan, where they say they targeted hangars housing U.S. military aircraft. Now, in addition to the actual bombings, the actual attacks, the reinstated U.S. blockade of Iran is also being seen as a major escalation. We've heard from Iran's deputy foreign minister, and he said that the reinstated U.S. blockade essentially dismantles the ceasefire deal.
It dismantles the ceasefire deal. Thank you so much for those updates. That was Blake Sifton reporting for CNA from Tel Aviv. Switching gears, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi faced opposition leaders in parliament today as lawmakers sought to end a standoff that disrupted proceedings in the upper house. Opposition parties had boycotted the diet, demanding greater scrutiny of the government and more opportunities to question the prime minister. The ruling camp has since agreed to an extended leaders' debate and further committee hearings, with the parliamentary session due to end on Friday. And for more, CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida joins us live from Tokyo. Michio, one of the key issues was a proposed revision to the Imperial House law. Could you explain to us why it was so contentious?
Well, why it was so contentious? Well, basically, adoption is not allowed by the imperial family based on the current Imperial House law. But the revised law will allow this. And not only that, the Takaichi government stated the son or the son of the adopted male will become heir to the throne. So to this, Ms. Takaichi said, nothing has been stipulated about the status of the adopted male son in the revised law. So naturally, you follow the current law, the son will become heir to the throne. Now, the other key issue was about princesses. The current law stipulates that they must leave the imperial family upon marrying a commoner. But the government wants them to stay, given there are less imperial family members to perform official duties. Now, there were complaints the government was pushing through a revision without the public's consent and without consent from the imperial family, basically made from opposition party members. And Ms. Takaichi said, parliamentarians are elected by the people, so the Diet represents the public. Now, recent media polls support allowing princesses to remain in the family. For instance, JNN, Japan News Network, Yomiuri Shimbun suggested more than 70% approve. On adoption of male, around 40 to 50% suggested support. Ms. Takaichi said after this revision, she will continue with further revisions to the Imperial House law, but she did not give any details.
And apart from contention surrounding the royal family, what were some of the other key issues raised throughout the debate?
Well, there were issues, for instance, the government was trying to be more accommodating to opposition parties' requests, so has agreed to postpone the voting of the Imperial House law in the upper house to Thursday in the special committee session. But reports out of the LDP say the party seeks to extend the Diet as it wants to legislate the law to decide on a backup of Japanese capital and to diversify major functions concentrated in Tokyo. Now, the Liberal Democratic Party's coalition partner, Ishin, or Japan Innovation Party, has a strong base in Osaka. And it's the party's aspiration to realize Osaka as a backup for Tokyo. And the lower house special committee approved the bill today, but they may need more time to legislate in the upper house. And Ishin only became LDP's coalition partner in October last year after Komeito decided to part ways after more than 20 years. It does not hold a cabinet post, so the LDP is indebted to respond to policy requests. But Japanese media say the government and the ruling LDP are not on the same page regarding the extension of the Diet session. And the Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara told his regular news conference there will be no extension.
Well, thank you so much for the latest. That was CNA's senior correspondent Michiyo Ishida reporting live from Tokyo. And we'll head out for another short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, China's relationship with South Africa entering a new phase with Chinese firms putting down deeper roots in the country. Welcome back. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. U.S. launches fresh attacks against Iran at the top of this hour after Tehran threatened to completely halt energy exports from the Middle East. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi debates opposition leaders amid a legislative gridlock in the Diet. And China's economic growth grew at its weakest pace in more than 3 years, raising questions over whether Beijing can meet its annual target. Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet is in China with his Thai counterpart Anutin Charnvirakul due to arrive tomorrow. Both leaders will attend the World Artificial Intelligence Conference, which begins on Friday. And the back-to-back visits come at a time when Beijing is stepping up engagement with Southeast Asian leaders. Mr. Hun is set to meet President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang, while Mr. Anutin will also be holding talks with Mr. Xi. Now, it will be the Thai leader's first official visit to China since taking office. And the Chinese president is expected to outline his country's vision for global AI governance at the World AI Conference, as Beijing seeks to deepen ties through technology cooperation. And for more analysis on China's engagement with ASEAN, we're joined by Joanne Lin, Senior Fellow and Coordinator from the ASEAN Studies Center at IC's Yusof Ishak Institute. Joanne, how significant are the visits by both Cambodian and Thai leaders to China this week? And specifically in terms of timing, what does it tell us about Beijing's diplomatic priorities in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, thank you, Grace, for having me. So Cambodia and Thailand will both visit China for the World AI Conference, as you mentioned earlier, and they are actually represented by their prime ministers. So they are attending at the highest level of government. And of course, I'm sure that there are other bilateral components in the visit program. I think this will be Prime Minister Anutin's first visit as Prime Minister, as you said, and AI is clearly an important part of the agenda, but these visits will definitely go well beyond engaging China on its tech capabilities. So these are also opportunities for high-level diplomacy with the Chinese leadership. And President Xi's personal participation in the opening, as I heard, will give the conference some significant political weight, elevating it beyond a technical discussion to really an event of broader strategic importance. And I think it also signals that China is increasingly integrating technology into its wider diplomacy towards Southeast Asia in supporting economic development and reinforcing its role as an indispensable regional partner. So for both Thailand and Cambodia, and of course, as well as other countries in Southeast Asia, maintaining strong relations with China is a very high priority, given China's importance as a trade, investment, infrastructure, and tech partner. So this technological dimension is certainly becoming a part of the architecture of China's relationship with ASEAN countries, I believe. Yeah.
So then can we say that it aligns with China's efforts to position itself as a leader of the global south, as President Xi Jinping has been trying for long? And how well is that message resonating with ASEAN countries?
Yeah, I think in the context of this conference, I mean, especially if you look at the scale and if you look at the international profile, I think that will strengthen China's efforts to position itself as a champion of the global south. And I heard that there's going to be more than 1,000 companies and exhibitions, including launch of the AI solutions. So it would definitely give Beijing a major platform to demonstrate, both its tech capabilities and its convening power, especially to the many developing countries in the global south. And I'm sure China wants to present itself as offering an alternative to an AI order that is actually dominated by advanced Western economies. And its diplomacy also stresses a lot on infrastructure, on training, on tech transfers, and greater participation by developing countries in setting the global rules and to strengthen their AI capacity. However, I think within ASEAN, this narrative will sort of resonate rather selectively, because while many ASEAN countries welcome, China's offer of investment or even affordable tech and even capacity building, that doesn't mean that ASEAN government will accept China as the sole rule setter for the global south. So they will continue to work with China while, also preserving partnerships with the US, with Japan, with EU and others. And I think ultimately the narrative will be judged by whether Chinese corporation build some genuine local capabilities and gives ASEAN country a meaningful voice rather than creating some form of technological dependence, which is what we don't want.
Right. And before we wrap up this interview, I want to end off with the growing technological rivalry between China and the U.S. and the position that ASEAN countries are put onto. More broadly, how do you think ASEAN countries should be approaching China today, especially as it's now using technology as a key strategy in forming all these cooperation and partnerships?
Yeah, I think China has already done a lot in this front with ASEAN countries. And I think that there are many things that are going. And I think there is this, what's that called? ASEAN-China digital economy and AI industry innovation center that's actually coming up. So this World AI Conference will certainly give Southeast Asian governments and companies some direct access, to the key policymakers and companies. And those are very important because we need China for AI applications, digital infrastructure, automations, that sort of things. But I think fundamentally, the presence of these two ASEAN leaders, in this conference, we cannot see it as an endorsement of China's entire approach to AI governance. I think it does, however, help Beijing to demonstrate that it can convene senior participation from the global south and to play a major role in shaping the AI debate. But ASEAN countries are likely to continue to seek interoperability. They will benefit from Chinese tech while, of course, keeping their systems compatible with other markets and preserving room to also work with the Western, and other partners in this field.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that analysis. That was Joanne Lin, Senior Fellow and Coordinator at ASEAN Studies Center at IC's Yusof Ishak Institute. And China's relationship with Africa is entering a new phase. Beyond infrastructure and trade, a new generation of Chinese entrepreneurs is reshaping that story. Olivia Xiong explores that changing relationship in South Africa in this week's episode of CNA Correspondent. Here's a preview.
For many South Africans, places like these became the first encounter with Chinese businesses. Rows of imported goods from China, family-run shops, entrepreneurs chasing opportunity. They became known simply simply as China malls.
So I've just been inside the China Mall, and really there are so many people inside shopping. After all, it is the weekend here, and you really can find everything from electronics to clothes, toys.
But this isn't where the story began. Johannesburg's actual Chinatown, Cyrildene, is where Chen Xiuzhu and many others first set up shop in 2006.
对于南非完全就是个陌生的地方，讲英语那我听得懂，如果是讲这边的话我听不懂，那没办法，只能自己硬学嘛。超市也开过，服装店也开过，那时候赚了第一笔钱嘛，那回家肯定要去建房子啊之类的。
But Miss Chen says the Chinatown she remembers is changing.
以前唐人街非常的繁华，就每到星期六、星期天街上都是人啊。你像现在街上都很安静啊。以前他们那些人都是居住在这一个地方，很集中嘛。那现在华人都分散了。你看三屯那边也有很多华人住在那边嘛，对吧？然后中非商贸城那边也有。
The center of gravity is shifting.
早期因私出国的比较多嘛，那现在中资国企的，就是这个企业级别的人多起来。
出来。
Away from small trading businesses towards larger companies. The entrepreneurs today often have a very different profile. 35-year-old Eason Zhou is one of them.
So over there, those are the inverters.
She studied overseas and relocated after marrying a South African. She worked in property before spotting an opportunity in 2022 during South Africa's electricity crisis.
I was having a casual chat with one of my friends from university, and she was looking for investment opportunities outside of China because after COVID, there aren't many opportunities in China. I said, well, why don't you look at solar? Because in South Africa, load shedding became a huge problem, and it actually impacted the neighboring countries as well. So within 3 months, I resigned my job. I opened this company. I flew to Joburg, opened a warehouse, and then we started recruiting people.
Her business isn't simply about importing solar equipment. It's about connecting Chinese manufacturers with African customers.
To tell us more about this story, Olivia herself is joining me in the studio right now. Olivia, thanks for joining us. Now, what is the reason you chose to do this story?
Yeah, out of the whole world, why pick South Africa? I mean, if you recall back in 2024, there was this very big diplomatic event called the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, and this was built as the largest gathering of foreign leaders in China since it emerged out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I remember it very well because at that point in time, everyone was talking about the horrendous traffic in Beijing. And that's because traffic would come to a standstill because Chinese President Xi Jinping, he was having one-on-one meetups with every single African leader that was in town. That's like 36 heads of state of government. But beyond that, we had for years reported about the Belt and Road Project and, the big railways, power stations, infrastructure that was coming up in Africa. At this particular forum, there were joint statements, action plans being announced as well. But increasingly also beyond the big headlines that grab your attention, I was also in Beijing and traveling around China, interacting with many more Chinese African diplomats, students, teachers, businessmen who were there. And I wanted to also understand the flip side of it. What was the Chinese community or business community like in Africa? And South Africa seemed like a good place to start because it's China's biggest trading partner in Africa, and you can see that almost in every phase of that relationship, from the small traders that sell those imported Chinese goods in those China malls that was in that clip earlier, and to those massive solar plant projects that we got to visit in the Northern Cape in South Africa. So ultimately, maybe we think of the China-Africa relationship as a lot about economics, but the story we wanted to tell was really about the people.
The people, and the relationship goes far back. And if you had to sum it up, what do you think was the biggest shift when it comes to China's relationship with South Africa, if we compare today to maybe some 10 or 20 years ago?
Yeah, so early on, it was mostly traders and private entrepreneurs that would head from China to South Africa. They worked on importing cheap Chinese goods to sell. Then the next phase were these big state-backed infrastructure projects, part of the Belt and Road Initiative. But today, you're seeing not just those working on infrastructure projects or from state-owned companies. Increasingly, you're also seeing many more large Chinese corporations entering the market and making their mark in South Africa. You're talking about Huawei, Hisense, BYD, Cherry, the list can go on and on. But the relationship, I would say, has become much more sophisticated and embedded. What do I mean by that? Let me just give you an example. So we visited a mine in Limpopo province. It's a chrome mine. And they had just signed an agreement with Sanae, which for use of its heavy equipment. And Sanae is not a new business. It's one of China's biggest heavy equipment manufacturers. It's been around for more than 3 decades. It set up shop in Johannesburg since 2006. But it was only at the end of last year that it officially commissioned its first industrial park. And the goal really there was to start manufacturing and assembling these heavy equipment within South Africa and also creating about 100 local jobs in the process as well. So as the Sanae representative told me, he said it's about putting down roots in South Africa.
Putting down roots in South Africa, so there's local benefits as well from this international project. But what do you think is driving that shift of sophistication?
Yeah, there are always the push and pull factors. So let's talk about the push factors, perhaps. So, China's economy has seen slowing growth. Today, we saw the headline, right, that Q2 figures of growth has slowed. There's also very fierce competition in certain industries at home. Companies are increasingly looking overseas. You hear this term "chuhai," which refers to Chinese enterprises looking to go overseas. And also, we have to remember that there are these geopolitical tensions. China is facing being accused of overcapacity, whether it's in US or Europe, China shock 2.0. So the Chinese companies are increasingly looking to find new markets and sources. One anecdote from the last lady that we saw in that clip, she is a young entrepreneur. In fact, she was in the property sector before, but she quit her job and opened a solar business in South Africa, in Johannesburg. And she said that now when she's a distributor of Chinese solar panels and solar systems, inverters, now, when she has gone back to China, she says she's getting so many invitations from these solar panel factories in China, asking them to visit their factories with the message, get us into the African market. And then let's go to the pull factors very quickly. South Africa wants investment, it wants growth. It also has issues with the trade imbalance, and it also wants jobs. It does have a high youth unemployment rate. So both sides seem to align on what they want.
Right, and as you mentioned in the very beginning, it's just more than beyond just the policies. It's the people and the stories behind that. Thank you so much. Can't wait to watch the full episode. And if you want to find out more about China's evolving role in South Africa on CNA Correspondent, tune in tonight on CNA. You can also watch it on our website, cna.asia, and our mobile app. And we'll go for a short break. Coming up on East Asia Tonight. One of the most heated rivalries in World Cup history is set to play out tonight, and the stakes could not be higher. Singapore government's tech arm, GovTech, will let go 93 staff in the first stage of what it calls a phase transformation. The 2-year exercise, which aims to help the agency shift its focus from project delivery to product ownership, will eventually affect up to 9% of its 3,900 workforce. GovTech chairman, that's Chen Kai-fong, stresses that the move is not driven by artificial intelligence, nor is it a cost-cutting or downsizing exercise. GovTech operates digital services such as SingPass, Scam Shield, and Parents Gateway. As part of this exercise, affected staff will receive 1 month's salary for every year of service, which is capped at 25 years. And the agency says it has successfully redeployed, quote, a substantial number of officers into new roles. It will continue to internally redeploy affected staff where possible. And for officers in project and vendor management roles that are affected, The agency is offering full salary apprenticeships and retraining programs. Mr. Chung adds that GovTech will support every affected officer with care and respect through this transition, regardless if the affected workers continue with GovTech, take up other roles in the public service, or even move beyond it entirely. One of the most heated rivalries in World Cup history is set to play out, and the stakes cannot be higher. England versus Argentina for a place in the final as the nations get set to play out the latest chapter in their storied World Cup history. While their first meeting in 1962, which the Three Lions won by 3-1, wasn't uneventful, the enmity kicked off in 1966 when tournament hosts England played Argentina in an ill-tempered 1-0 victory. And that game ended with England manager Alf Ramsey describing Argentina's players as animals, while the Argentines would refer the game as the theft of the century over claims the winning goal was offside. Captain Antonia Ratin, who died last Saturday, was sent off for requesting an interpreter and had to be escorted off the field by 2 police officers. Argentina went home as England won their only World Cup, with the sending off of Ratin leading to the introduction of red and yellow cards at the next tournament and all others afterwards. And since the 1980s, there's also been a political element added to the matches, with the two countries engaged in a military dispute over the Falkland or Malvinas Islands in 1982. That naturally colored their next World Cup encounter in the year of 1986. That's 20 years after the infamous Wembley match. This time in Mexico City's Azteca Stadium in another quarterfinal, a game remembered for Diego Maradona's infamous so-called hand of God, the diminutive Argentine scoring with his hand to put the team 1-0 ahead before he settled the game by dribbling past half the England team to score and leading Argentina to winning the World Cup. The next encounter was in France in 1988 in an epic round of 16 tie that all will remember for David Beckham and the infamous red card he received for kicking out an Argentine midfielder named Diego Simeone. And the match ended 2-2, and England were bundled out on 4-3 on penalties, but all the blame went on Beckham in an incident the midfielder says shaped his career. Beckham, though, would redeem himself and get his revenge on Argentina and Simeone 4 years later. That's 2002 in Sapporo, where the captain scored a controversial penalty to win their Group F tie 1-0, effectively ending the Argentines' hopes of getting out of the group. Which takes us to the upcoming match. The two sides having never met in the semifinals before, Argentina's Lionel Messi also set to face England for the first time in his career in what promises to be a worthy addition to this storied World Cup rivalry. And catch FIFA World Cup 2026 coverage with Singapore's national media network, MediaCorp. Curated highlights also available on MeWatch and MediaCorp Sports YouTube channel, TikTok, and other digital platforms. And that's Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. For our Singapore audience, do stay on for the highlights of the FIFA World Cup semifinals between Spain and France. Thanks for watching.
A semi-final showdown in Texas between Europe's big guns of this World Cup, and it was European champion Spain who struck first against 2022 finalist France. Lamine Yamal drawing the penalty that Mikel Oyarzabal put away from the spot for his 5th goal of the tournament. France had come into the match in Dallas with the finest attack in the tournament, only for Spain to snuff it out and head to the break a goal ahead. A quick goal needed from France and their fast forwards in the second half, but it was Spain who scored the second in the 58th minute. Slick and stylish play sending Pedro Porro free, the fullback, with a fine finish to make it 2-0. La Roja on fire and looked to have made it 3 just 2 minutes later, only for Yamal's effort to be ruled offside. Frustrated French fans were willing their forwards to fire, but Spain suffocated French flair, smothering any embers of a comeback. The European champions sailing through on the back of a dominant 2-0 victory into their second World Cup final and their first since winning their only title in 2010. Now France, in coach Didier Deschamps' last tournament in charge, denied a third straight appearance in the final, with his and their bid for a third World Cup title ended. Spain will face either England or Argentina in the final in New Jersey.